This is Lou Ann Canale of the Livingston County Historical and Genealogical Society. With me here today at the cabin is Lola Guess, a longtime member of the society. Lola, for a number of years now, I have heard bits and pieces about you and some crazy bank robbery in Tiline. We are here today to get to the bottom of this, to set the record straight. So, Lola, tell us about the bank robbery.
Well, first, let me begin with a little background on Tiline Bank. The banking business began in Dycusburg in 1903. Dycusburg was a busy riverport town. There was a canning factory, there was tobacco, there was warehouses. Those were just some of the major businesses and crops in Dycusburg. So there was a man named Charlie Smith. And Charlie Smith could see that a bank was needed in Dycusburg and opened the People's Bank of Dycusburg on June 4th, 1903. The bank prospered and became the center of financial activities. Unfortunately, it was also during the time of the Night Riders and the Tobacco Growers Association. Warehouses full of tobacco were being burned across western Kentucky by the Night Riders. Masked night riders rode into town, terrorizing the citizens, whipping, burning businesses, and causing financial ruin. Dycusburg was a target twice. The first raid was in 1906 and burned 39 of the town's businesses and homes. Then on July 27th of 1907, the night riders struck again. During the night, Dycusburg began to burn. They formed a bucket brigade down to the river, but they were unable to save any of the burning buildings. So when daylight came, Charlie Smith hired a guard, placed it around the bank's vault, waited to see what was left of the bank, but it was too late. Everything had been destroyed. So the bank was liquidated, the depositors were paid, and Dycusburg was never the same again.
Okay, so how does this become a Tiling Bank robbery story?
Well, let me give you a little background on Charlie Smith. The Smith family arrived in western Kentucky with just a few possessions. Eleanor, Charlie's mother, is said to have arrived on horseback with a feather bed tied to her horse. But with good business sense and hard work, the Smith family became one of the most influential families in western Kentucky. Charlie Smith was Jim Smith's grandfather. And the Smith family remained loyal to the bank for almost 100 years later. So Charlie Smith was not about to be defeated by the Night Riders. He owned approximately 2,000 acres on the Tiline side. He owned Smith's store, and he had a lot of interest in the floor spar industry. So with all this being on the Tiline side rather than at Dycusburg, he decided that it would be easier for him to run the bank from the Tiline side of the river. So it's said that he moved the People's Bank of Dycusburg across the river in a suitcase.
Oh, gosh.
And so then in July 13th of 1909, the Bank of Tiline opened its doors for business. And Charlie had been right. The bank's deposits grew, the bank prospered, the board of directors approved loans. 1929 came the Great Depression. Few banks across the country survived, but Tiline Bank kept right on going under the leadership of Owen Spicer. Then came the flood of 1937. Tiline and most of western Kentucky was underwater for a very long time. Days before Tiline flooded, Owen Spicer gathered all of his bank records and the money and put them in tow sacks, moved up to higher ground behind the bank, and then proceeded to do the business of Tiline Bank from these two tow sacks under his bed.
Oh my gosh. Times were tough back then, weren't they?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
In 1950, started the bank robberies. Two men broke into the bank during the night and tried to open the vault. They were unsuccessful, and they finally only got away with about $75 in nickels and dimes. And Ralph Smith was the sheriff at the time, and he said that it looked like they had used a crowbar to try to get into the vault. And then later in 1950, the bank was actually robbed during daylight hours. Michael Romano and Ralph Lauren of Chicago were the bank robberies. Celie Ann Peake drove the getaway car. Kofer and Spicer were told to lie down on the floor. Their hands were tied behind their back, tied to their feet, and they got away with about $2,537. The getaway car was a 1949 Blue Mercury stolen in Paducah. The car was found near Scotts Chapel Road. Romano and Peake were arrested within 30 hours, which was a record for bank robbery arrest in western Kentucky at that time. Lauren was arrested within 48 hours. The jury deliberated 9 minutes. Romano got 25 years, Peake got 12, and Lauren's case was held over for review. Then in 1954, the bank was robbed of about $2,500. Spicer and Kofer said the car drove back and forth several times that morning before they finally stopped. A man by the name of Red Osborne and a father and son duo with the last name of Heffington from Morganfield later confessed.
Now, Lola, I know you're not old enough to have witnessed robberies in the 50s.
You're right. But then there was one more robbery before my experiences, and that was in June the 22nd of 1973. Two masked men took $16,968. Joed Cothran and Kenneth Colbert were arrested. Marlene Wadlington was the driver. This time, the car was a 1968 blue Chevy stolen in Paducah. They brought a pillowcase and told Alfreda McCandless to fill up the pillowcase with the money. Carol Walker and Shirley Davis were told to lie down on the floor. But Shirley told the robbers that she just wasn't able to get down on the floor, so they just moved on. Then in 1979 was my first bank robbery.
Okay.
It was a hot Saturday morning when a lone gunman walked into Tiline. He walked past Smith's store, waved at the men sitting on the porch, walked on around to the bank. There was a car sitting in front of the bank. The customer was Alice Ledbetter. So he went around the back of the bank and walked up on the porch and waited until the car left. Then he came into the bank. I came down to my window and I said, "Can I help you?" And he took out a box of Glad bags, took a bag out of the box, laid the box over on the counter, and said, "Fill up this bag with money." And I wasn't about to do anything like that without permission. So I turned around, even though there was a gun aimed at me, I turned around, went into Carol's office and said, "Carol, there's a man out there that wants all our money." And the color just kind of went out of his face. And he said, "Give it to him." And he got up out of his chair, followed me back out to the window, and I started filling up the bag. And I cleaned out everything. I gave him the money, the coins. I gave him the heavy rolled coins, which he probably didn't want. And the lady standing next to me was on the phone. And when she realized what was going on, she just laid the phone down on the counter instead of hanging it up. And then the lady on the other end was listening to the whole bank robbery. Then the bank robber took Carol into the vault, demanding the rest of the money. And there was only $750 in the vault. And so he shoved the gun up into Carol's ribs and said, "Where's the rest of the money?" And so he took him to the back of the bank, still demanding money. And Shirley could hear their conversation. And she just yelled out, "That's all there is. We're expecting more money today." So he seemed to change his mind, came back to the front of the bank, brought Carol up, and we were all standing there. And he decided he was going to tie our hands. And he had a ski rope, but it was a big, thick ski rope. And when he tried to make a knot, it wouldn't hold, it kept slipping. So he gave up on that, put the rope back into his bag, and as we were standing there, Carol looked at the camera button and then he looked at me. And I got the message. And I made one tiny step closer and he said, "Don't move." So we didn't have any cameras running. So then he decided he was going to put us in the vault. So he tried to lock the vault door shut, but you couldn't lock it shut during the day because it was locked open for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So then he just told us to get in the vault. He asked me for my car keys. I said, "They're in the car." He said, "They better be." So he said, "Stay inside the vault until I'm out of sight." So he left the bank. We stayed in the bank, in the vault, just a few minutes, came out, and he drove slowly out of town, waved at the men on the porch again. But when he got out of Tiline, he floorboarded it. And then when he went around the curve at Sugar Creek, he lost a hubcap. And then Herbert Driscoll was on his way to the bank that morning, stopped, picked up the hubcap, brought it to the bank. Said, "Hey, somebody lost a hubcap." My car. It was a 1971 lime green Plymouth. So the bank robber drove it down the cutoff road, hit a post, totaled the car. The bank later reimbursed me for the car.
Okay.
He got out with his bag, ran through a honeysuckle thicket, a wheat field, a soybean field, dropping money along the way. So they were able to recover about $6,000 of the approximately $13,047 that was taken. He had on a wig, a beard, and a hat. His name was Darvon Bontrager from Gary, Indiana. He was arrested about 2 weeks later after robbing a bank in Wisconsin, and then he was later sentenced to 15 years for the Tiline Bank robbery. And we all testified against him in court, but it wasn't our testimony that convicted him. It was the box of Glide bags that he left on the counter that contained his fingerprints, and an FBI expert identified his prints, and that was his big mistake. And also during the trial, Bill Cunningham was the prosecutor, and Ralph Smith was the sheriff at the time. And there was a big tall window, well, still is, on the left of the courtroom. There's no screens, and you could look out and see the rooftops below. And during the break, he stood up, looked out the window, kind of leaned over, and I could just read his mind. I thought, he's going to jump. Well, Ralph Smith, I think, kind of thought the same thing. And so he got up, got him by the arm, put him back in his seat.
Oh my, this all sounds so scary. You sure show a lot of bravery.
Well, I don't know about that, but then in 1987 was my second robbery.
Second? Oh my.
On July 13th, 1987, a gunman walked into Tiline, went straight to Carol's office and said, "This is a holdup." Ralph Smith was judge at the time, and he had arranged for Myrick's release earlier that year from the Kentucky State Reformatory and had given him a job. And Myrick used a gun that he had stolen from Dorothy Mitchell's house to rob the bank. But he was familiar with the area, having grown up in the Coons Chapel area. So that morning, he had hidden under a culvert, in a culvert under the bridge on Tiline Road. So when he came into the bank, Jean Champion was a customer there, and she had a $100 bill laying on the counter. She was trying to make a deposit for her business in Smithland. Myrick reached over, grabbed the $100 bill, and stuffed it in his bag. He then told Jean that she was going to have to drive him out of town, and she said, "I can't do it. I'm just too nervous." So at that point, I was trying to disappear or just melt so he wouldn't pick me.
Right.
So then he turned to Carol and was waving his gun around and said, "Carol, you're going to drive me." So they left, got in Carol's car, drove up Paradise Road. He stopped, told Carol to get out. And then Carol walked to Henry Harp's house to call the bank and get a ride back. And so then the next day, the state police arrested Myrick standing on the side of the road in Iuka. They said it looked like he was just there waiting for a bus. But he had been in and out of prison for about 20 years and had a lot of problems. So, and then in September, he was in jail waiting for a trial. And he and another inmate overpowered a deputy and escaped from Smithland Jail. So he was on the loose again for a couple of weeks. And this time, the state police arrested him several days later over at Kentucky Dam State Park on the beach.
Oh my gosh.
And he was finally sentenced to 20 years.
Okay, so I never understood that you witnessed 2 bank robberies.
Yes.
Did you stay in the banking business?
Yes, I certainly did. And the next event was in 1989. FBI agents and the Kentucky State Police received a tip that they were going to rob Tiline Bank. But this time they said they weren't going to leave any witnesses.
Oh my.
So after telling this, about a month later, Carol got a call at home, and the FBI told him that the plan was on, that we were going to be robbed the next day. So he called me and he called Elfrida and told us to get ready, that the bank was going to be robbed the next day. Mm. So Carol arrived early the next morning and the FBI began securing the building. The back door was nailed shut. They put 2x4s over it. All the lights were turned out except for one light in the center of the bank. They closed the curtains and the blinds. And when Elfrida arrived, she usually parked right in front of the bank. And Carol went out and told her that she needed to park her car in a different direction because the FBI wanted to use it as a shield in case there's gunfire. Well, Elfrida didn't understand the night before. She didn't understand that the plan was on. She thought the plan was gone. So Carol told her to back up, turn her car the other direction. So she put it in gear, slammed on the gas, slammed on the brakes. Her car was rocking. So he said, do it again. So she did. This time she put it in reverse, slammed on the gas, slammed on the brake, and this time it was really rocking. Well, even though it was a very serious situation, mm-hmm. the FBI agents were just doubling over with laughter at her attempts to park her car. So finally, Carol just told her to get out and he would park her car. So inside the bank, a carpenter had been remodeling for the past couple of months. And the FBI thought, well, this would be, in order to make things look as like business as usual, that he should stay. So they talked to the carpenter, and after thinking it over, he decided he would stay. And he later told us that I can't believe I'm staying here waiting for a bank to be robbed. And so he gathered his tools and started measuring, cut a board, put it up to nail it about 3 inches too short. He wasn't concentrating, and he didn't get much done that day. So one of the FBI agents decided that it would be a good idea if he posed as a carpenter to make it look normal. Mm-hmm. So he got some coveralls, pulled them up over his bulletproof vest, and got a broom, and stood there and swept that same spot all day long.
Yes. How were you holding up?
Well, during all this, my first thought was, I'm probably going to be out of balance at the end of the day. But then my second thought was, I'm probably not going to be alive to worry about it.
Oh, my gosh.
So Frank Smith's office was in the front of the bank there, and there was a deputy lying on the floor with a sawed-off shotgun. And I shut the door. A helicopter was circling the bank. There were FBI agents stationed across the road in the church and in a residence nearby. And as a signal, we were supposed to nod when someone came in the bank and if it was okay for them to let them in. Mm-hmm. So about 9 o'clock, George Hart came to the bank, told me he wanted to deposit a check. And as I was writing, somebody came to the door, and I went like that. Someone else came to the door, and I nodded. And George Hart, are you okay? What's going on? And he was looking around knowing that it was different. And the only thing I could think of to tell him was that The front door was broken, and the carpenter was having to open the door when somebody came. But he didn't buy it. He knew there was something else going on. And then meanwhile, there were 3 FBI agents stationed in a creek in a house not too far from the bank. One FBI agent was up in a tree with binoculars watching the house. There was a second FBI agent in the creek trying to get closer to the house. And then the third one, he was just in the general area. So they watched the house all morning, and then finally the men left the house. They could see the guns. So they called the bank, said it would be about 10 to 15 minutes that they had left, and that they would soon be there. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, the FBI and the state police were transmitting information out over the airways that armed men were heading in the direction of Tiline Bank. Well, this was being picked up by local scanners as well. And the FBI agents later told us that they thought these men had also listened to that transmission. So when they got to the fork in the road, they, instead of turning the direction they thought they were going to turn, they turned the opposite way and went to Grand Rivers, went to the Pelican, and ordered coffee.
Oh my gosh.
So the FBI agents then called us and told us that we were out of immediate danger, but they stayed with us the rest of the day, and then they continued to monitor the situation in case they decided to revive it again.
Lola, with your nerves of steel, maybe you should have been an FBI agent.
There you go. There were actually 2 more robberies that were connected with the Bank of Livingston County later. One was at the Grand Rivers branch. It was robbed in July of 1999 by Norman Springs. Norman was shot later in the day, shot and killed at the Reedland exit off I-24. The driver was Bobby Joe Vaughn. The second robbery was at Ledbetter, and it was robbed August the 7th of 2000 by Monty McLeod. He tied Debbie Dodds up, but she was able to dial 911 with her tongue and got help. And he took Debbie's car and later left it at the Ledbetter storage. So although the bank continued to grow, at that time, though, the business of the practice of corporate banking and consolidation and mergers had begun. So the Bank of Livingston County was purchased by Area Bank in August of 1999, and then of August of 2000, the Tiline Bank was closed permanently. BB&T then purchased Area Bank and finally closed the Ledbetter and the Grand Rivers branches. Mm-hmm. So after close to 100 years, the long and colorful history of the bank that Charlie Smith had started in Dycusburg in 1903 came to an end.
Wow. So how long did you work in the banking industry?
I worked there almost 30 years, and I stayed because the benefits far outweighed the hazards. The people of Livingston County, I really loved and enjoyed, and all the good days far outnumbered the bad days.
Sounds like it. So in addition to robberies, you're also very knowledgeable about the banking industry in Livingston County.
Thank you.
Lola, I appreciate you taking your time to share with us your knowledge and experiences. For those of you that do not know, Lola is one of our greatest contributing members of the society. Not only does she know Livingston County history, but she's also an excellent writer and has received many grants to help pay for the activities of the society. We appreciate you and thank you for your dedication to preserving the history of Livingston County.
Thank you.
Thank you.